The Honourable Member Holly Walker.
E te kai hatu o te whare tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe.
E mihi ana ki ngā mema o te whare parimata tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou mō te wiki o te reo Māori. Mr Speaker, the Green Party has been aware for some time that legislation of this nature would soon be coming before the House. But I have to say it's very disappointing to have it come to the House in the manner that it has today, under urgency with only a few hours' notice and no advanced copy of the legislation. And under different circumstances, Mr Speaker, it's likely that I would have been thanking the Minister for the open way in which he'd consulted with parties across the House about the need for this legislation. And indeed, to give the Minister credit, he did do that, and he did proactively consult with parties about options for amending the Copyright Act to address the fact that the current ban on the parallel importation of films will lapse at the end of October. However, unfortunately, Mr Speaker, some of that goodwill has been undone by the decision to introduce this bill under urgency without notice, in the middle of the time during which the Minister had sought the views of other parties. Because there's no apparent need for such a high degree of urgency, we in the Green Party consider we have not had sufficient time to consider this legislation, and indeed, for that reason, we will abstain on the bill at first reading. But we will revise this position and either support or oppose the legislation at subsequent stages after a select committee has considered it. But, Mr Speaker, with such an unjustifiably poor process followed today, we're unable to take a firm position in the House tonight. I'd like to take a step back, Mr Speaker, and talk about the issue that this bill seeks to address. It has been covered by other speakers to an extent as well. So between 1998 and 2003, the parallel importation of films and DVDs was unrestricted in New Zealand. But in 2003, the then Labour government introduced a 5-year temporary ban to prohibit the commercial importation of films for a period of 9 months after the film's first public release. And the Green Party supported the introduction of this 5-year ban at the time. This was renewed in 2008, but it's due to lapse, as we've heard, on the 31st of October of this year. And, Mr Speaker, the film industry contends that it would be detrimental to allow the restriction to lapse at this time, and it's requested that it be continued in some form. And as I understand it, there are two main issues here. The first is the impact that unrestricted parallel imports of films and DVDs would have on local cinemas, particularly regional cinemas, smaller regional cinemas in provincial New Zealand, and the people that they employ. And secondly, there is a risk that small independent local films, which are a marginal proposition in terms of profitability as it is, may not be made if there is not a guaranteed period during which they can be exclusively screened in cinemas. And the example, I guess, that we could use of this would be the damage that was done to the film Sione's Wedding when counterfeit copies of it were extensively distributed during its theatrical release. So that wasn't an issue of parallel importation, but it did illustrate the impact that the circulation of copies of a film can have during that early period of its release on the profitability of the film. And we certainly wouldn't want to see anything that would result in a constraining of the New Zealand film industry. In addition, I understand that there are some questions about the future viability of both large and small film festivals, because if there's no way to restrict the distribution of the same films by DVD before they are released at the film festival, that could be problematic for securing films for and audiences for film festivals. And I'm sure this will be close to the hearts of many members as they pour through the programme for the 2013 International Film Festival at the moment. There is, of course, a counter-argument to all of this, which is, and it was expressed actually quite nicely by the previous speaker, Claire Curran, when she said that the world has moved on, that we really shouldn't be favouring one particular form of distribution of film content over another, that in an era of increasingly digital distribution, in which New Zealand does miss out currently, often for months, on high-profile international titles which have been released overseas, and during which time people are given a perverse incentive to illegally download titles in frustration that they're not legally available in New Zealand. In a period such as this, there is an argument that it doesn't make much sense to continue to artificially hold parallel importation at bay. And indeed, it effectively takes place at the moment because, as Claire Curran said, the internet has changed the situation dramatically. There is rapid circulation of unrestricted copies of films on the internet. And in the light of this reality, I think there really is a strong argument that we should explore how to facilitate legal file sharing sooner, rather than trying to cling on to the idea that we can limit films to release through cinemas only. And no doubt these issues will be teased out by the Select Committee in the submission process, and we'll listen very carefully to these because we think that there's a lot of merit in these arguments as well as we come to a decision about whether to support or oppose the bill at future stages. However, these concerns notwithstanding, we do share the concern of the Minister that we need to retain regional cinemas and the jobs that they create and the employment that they create in these communities, and we do need to protect and maximise the opportunities for the New Zealand film industry. Now, the particular legislation that the Minister has put before the House tonight would extend the current ban until 2016, but it would shorten the restricted period from 9 months to 6 months. And it's not clear from this particular vantage point the rationale for that particular configuration of extension of time and reducing the number of months. So it will be interesting to hear from officials, and hopefully we will, at the committee about why this particular combination of years and months was chosen. I note that it is, in fact, another temporary solution, which may require Parliament to revisit it again in 3 years' time. And I do wonder whether it might have been better or possible to undertake a more comprehensive process at this time to effect a permanent solution to this issue, rather than continuing to legislate for it in a rather ad hoc way every few years, as has happened since 2003. And essentially that is our discomfort with the legislation and the reason that the Green Party is abstaining at this first reading, because it does all feel very ad hoc. It's beyond me why this bill needed to be introduced in such a rush today. In such a rush, in fact, that we were unable to attain a copy this afternoon because it was still being written, when the government has known since 2008 that the temporary restrictions would lapse at the end of October this year, and they've had months, if not years, to figure out a policy response to the lapse of the ban. And I know that the industry has been actively engaging with the Minister for several months, so there's been plenty of time to take a decision and bring it to the House in a timely manner. And in fact, there is still plenty of time because the provisions don't lapse until the end of October, and it's only the beginning of July. So there's still 4 months for Parliament to consider legislation on this matter, and so it's not at all clear why we are looking at it in such an urgent process tonight. It smacks of a very ad hoc, poor process on the part of the government and in relation to this legislation. We think the Minister would have been better off to finish engaging with the other parties, to seek a permanent rather than another temporary solution, and to allow time for a fulsome Select Committee process to take place. But instead we're here in the House debating this bill with only a few hours' notice, and the Green Party can't support this. So for this reason we will abstain on the bill until future stages. Nō reira, Mr Speaker, kua tae mai au ki te mutunga o tāku kōrero, tēnā koutou katoa.
I call the Honourable Member Pasata Sam Lotu Ainga, Tolofalava.